Buonasera, buon pomeriggio. Welcome everyone to our last episode. This is the last episode of our series, Virtual Salons, Discourses on Black Italia. I can't believe we are already at the end of this very long but fascinating journey. So today's topic is quite crucial for us. Is actually the struggles related to the citizenship law in Italy. And we will have a fantastic panel of speakers who will tell us about their scholar work, their activist work on this topic. But first of all, I would like to introduce my wonderful co-host, Candice Whitney, that will also tell us a bit about the previous episodes. Hi, Candice.
Hi, Angelica. Thank you. Yes, can't believe we are at the final episode of this series where we unpack the intersectional layers of race, identity, and citizenship in Italy. So the first episode, we focused on the colonial legacies that Italy has, and we had Shalene Green, a professor at UCLA, and the writer Francesca Melandri and Angelica speak about the colonial history that Italy has and how that is remembered or silenced. And then we also invited, in the following episode, Amada Lacus, who's a writer, as well as Taqwa Ben Mohammed, who is a comic artist, and Wisal Hubibi, who is also an artist and activist, to speak about the prejudices that Italians of North African descent experience and how they build new narratives through humor and irony. There was also a presentation by Matza Mengiste on the Shadow King. And we also, the most recent one was a presentation of Future, Il domani narrato dalle voci di oggi, or Future, the voices, tomorrow narrated by the voices of today. And we had 3 contributing authors of the anthology come and speak, including Angelica Pesarini. And I'm Candice. I'm a translator and also a Fulbright scholar from 2016 to 2017 to Italy. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you all. And I'll pass it back to Angelica.
Thank you, Candice. Thank you so much. So I just would like to say a few words about today's topic. So the struggles related to the citizenship law. And our question was, why do immigrant youth fight for citizenship in Italy? How is this fight connected to the death of migrants in the Mediterranean Sea? And so in this conversation, we decided to invite a panel of activists and scholars who will explore existing immigration laws and proposed reforms, obstacles and accomplishments in the movement for citizenship. We will also address how citizenship is actually a component of Black Lives Matter and cannot be separated from the situation occurring in the Mediterranean. So I would like to start introducing our guests. And the first guest we have, great pleasure, she's a friend, she's an activist, Benedicta Djumpah from Brescia. Benedicta has Ghanaian roots. She's an activist and a member of the group Italiani senza cittadinanza, Italians without citizenship. In 2018, Benedicta acted the role of Rosa Parks in the film Io sono Rosa Parks, I am Rosa Parks, which was awarded the best film by second generation youth from Migrati at the Venice Film Festival. She's committed to contributing to the empowerment of citizens and building a more just and equitable society. She currently works in international education at an American campus in Rome. Benedicta holds a BA in International Relations and Politics from London Metropolitan University. She has a master's degree in International Relations, and she's also a recent alumnus of the Policy School, Scuola di Politiche Enrico Letta.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Angelica.
Yes, thank you for joining us, and thank you, Angelica. We also have Dr. Camilla Hawthorne, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She's a principal faculty member in UCSC's Critical Race and Ethnic Studies program and an affiliate of the Science and Justice Research Center and the Legal Studies program. Camilla is a critical human geographer and interdisciplinary social scientist broadly interested in the racial politics of migration and citizenship, inequality, social movements, and Black geographies. Her work sits at the intersection of critical public policy studies, diaspora theory, Black European studies, and post-colonial and feminist science and technology studies. She currently serves...
Oh, sorry.
She currently serves as the chair of the Black Geography Specialty Group of the American Association of Geographers. She's an executive committee member of the California Italian Studies and a member of numerous editorial boards. In addition, she's the project manager and faculty member of the Black Europe Summer School, a 2-week intensive course on citizenship, race, and ethnic relations held each summer in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. She received her PhD in 2018 in geography at UC Berkeley with a designated emphasis in science and technology studies.
Great. Thank you, Camilla, and thank you, Candice. And finally, we have Selam Tesfai, who is an activist and member of Cantiere, a political group born in Milan and active since 2001. Selam was born to Eritrean parents, and she has been fighting against institutional racism for several years. She's a freelance project manager, and she's interested in intersectional feminism. In fact, she's a member of the transfeminist network Non Una di Meno. She's also a member of the committee per non dimenticare Abba, do not forget Abba, a group born to remember Abba, Abdul Williams Guibre, a 19-year-old Black Italian man who was killed in a hatred crime in Milan in 2008. And in fact, we will talk about this with Selam later on. So I would like to start with you, Selam. So we've been talking about citizenship law, but maybe we should explain for our audience why we have so many issues with this law. I would like to remember that in Italy, citizenship is transmitted by blood, and it's called jus sanguinis, right of blood, unlike the US, for example, where it's by soil. So the main difference is that if you were born in the US, you are, by right, an American citizen. In Italy, if you were born in Italy by non-Italian parents, so if you don't have Italian blood, you are not Italian. And as you will see, this creates a lot of issues to newborn Italian. So, Selam, what are the issues? Can you tell us what are the issues with this law? And also this new project to switch from jus sanguinis to jus culturae. Would you see this as an improvement?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity. That as for me, I'm the perfect example of a person that was born in Italy, that had been living here for my whole life, and I had to ask for my Italian citizenship. So it was my request to the Italian state to be Italian at the age of 18, and I had for law 1 year to request. We have different kind of difficulties in this kind of law that is a law from 1991, so the age I was born, so almost 30 years. It's pretty old and not able to satisfy the need to be fully in the right to have to claim also for welfare, for public position, so as jobs. It can be really difficult for a person to live in Italy and believe that he's Italian or she's Italian, because the Italian law kind of rejects you since the beginning. So it was difficult, for example, because in 2015, there was a draft of a law. It was a law actually asked by the people. In 2012, there was a campaign called Italia sono anch'io. I'm also Italian. It was actually bring it on by the Italiani senza cittadinanza movement that are now represented by Benedicta, but also other let's say civilian, other people organized in the cities that were asking for the law to be renovated. And so this reform actually stuck in the parliament because it was accepted by the Chamber of Deputies, but it never went through the whole process to become a real law. And this law introduced two kind of, let's say, arguments in the public debate about the renovation of this citizenship law. The first one was the ius soli temperato, which means was actually, Angelica was explaining pretty well about the fact that if you're born in the Italian soil, so if you're born here, actually you are allowed to access to the Italian citizenship, but you have to be, one of your parents have to be legally here since and before your date of birth. And the second introduction, so the ideally with this, the Italian state said, we don't want to be like the United States. We don't want people that are born here and that are automatically, without even considering the family history, fully Italians. And the other introduction was the ius culturae. The idea that if you are not born in Italy, or your parents or one of your parents is not legally when you're born here, or you come in Italy at the age of maximum 12 years old, you can become Italian by going to school. So if you have a minimum of 5 years of Italian school, and for the elementary school, for example, there was written that you had to pass the exam with good and positive notes. You can declare you're willing to become Italian citizenship until you're 20, so 2 years more than before. But this reform never became a reality for us. So there was never the political willing to bring this reform to become a real law. So this is the position. I think that ius culturae, it's pretty culturally, it's pretty problematic for us, because the idea that you have to be good in school, that you have to gain your Italian citizenship already when you're a child, you have to gain something for Italian. That's something that really processed in a really bad way, or for the children, because the psychological damage of not being considered Italian, or to be challenged to be a good Italian, it's something that we really see in our younger generation.
Sure. So you don't think then that ius culturae would be an improvement, actually? You disagree with that?
I think that when you propose a law and you propose something higher and something lower, what's going to pass the lower point? And so when you're already introducing something so tricky, not to give the citizen, so the ius soli, the idea of giving citizenship to whoever is living and growing up in Italy, and so thinking and being Italian, because the culture is what we really think means being Italian, then you're really saying, we're not going to do the highest level, but we're going to try to pass with the ius culturae. So I think that the reform was full, but I think that what they try to do is to say to us that ius soli, or any kind of full recognition of the Italian citizenship, is not an option for who was born from foreign parents.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Selam.
Thank you, Selam. Thank you for that overview. And it also had me really reflecting on just how citizenship rights really are a global phenomenon. And in the US, we have Daca and Dreamers. And for those who are not familiar, I'll just give a quick overview. So DACA is a law that protects youth in the United States that do not have citizenship, that are over 16 years old, and who have been living in the US since 2007 from deportation, specifically by providing them access and eligibility for education, driver's license, even employment. And they're called Dreamers because they are impacted by the Daca and Dreamer Acts. And even this year in June, the Supreme Court actually blocked an attempt to overturn Daca. So just like in Italy, we're still dealing with in the United States these fights for citizenship. And specifically, I should add too that DACA and Dreamer do not really, for DACA, it doesn't provides very limited, I would say, eligibility or access even to citizenship. So that's definitely a difference. And Benny, I would really appreciate if you could just share with us some more about why youth in Italy are fighting for citizenship.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for the introduction and having me today. So why we're fighting for citizenship rights? So for us, we have more than almost 1 million Italians without citizenship. And it's important for us to be recognized as Italians for what Selam previously mentioned, the fact that we want to access the same rights and the same opportunities as our classmates, people that we were born by at the hospital or people that we were raised with. So we want the same opportunities. So this is why we're fighting. And in particular, also, if we're saying Black Lives Matter means also applying and having a change in the Italian citizenship law. Because unfortunately, due to the fact that we have a law based on blood, is also one of the resistance of when it came to change the citizenship law was the fact that people will say, oh, the Black Italians do not exist. And this as a sentence being used multiple times. So it's important, we're fighting for recognition. So the importance of being recognized for our identity and the fact that we belong to this country, whether we're Black, depending on our faith, whichever background it is, when we're not seen traditionally Italian, we belong to our country. So we are also fighting for belonging, because I think I'm so touched by the DACA generation, because there are some similarities with the Italian situation, although there are some differences, because oftentimes the citizenship law here oftentimes does not affects also people that are born in Italy and oftentimes or raised in Italy. And oftentimes people, in this case, young Italians have a permit to stay, whether temporary or permanent. So that's kind of the difference with the US. But the similarity, I see, is the fact that we want to be recognized for our identity, to be part of this country, to be part of our territories, and the fact that we belong here. So one fight is for belonging and the fact that we belong to our territories, and we do not want to live with that fear that one day the immigration office would tell us that, okay, today your permit will not be granted, despite we've been born or raised in this country. So for this reason, we're fighting for equal access to opportunities as well. One important article for us is the Article 3 of the Italian Constitution, which states the fact that citizens are equal without distinction, whether a race, gender, and religion. But unfortunately, what we see with this law, we see a lack of equality when it comes in that sense, because what you're saying, you're not seen as citizens. Let's start from there. Like, you almost not included in that part of the law. We want to be included as citizens. We want to be seen as such. We want to decide for our governments, and we want to have the equal access to opportunities. And so the second part of the Article 3 of the Italian Constitution says that the Republic has the responsibility to remove the obstacles that do not permit equality and the full development of the human being. So as Selam said earlier about the citizenship law, actually the citizenship law, you cannot access certain jobs opportunities if you don't have Italian citizenship. In this current pandemic, we have doctors that are Italians without citizenship, trained, formed here in Italy, that could not contribute to the current public health crisis because they didn't have citizenship. Because oftentimes, many of the competition, bandi, we call them in Italian, did not consider Italian doctors to be able to participate and to be able to access these job opportunities. And so for us, it's a fight for recognition of our identity, our belonging. It's a fight for inclusion. We do not need to be integrated. We're not alien to this country. We just need to be included. And it's also a fight for equity and justice and our full development as human beings and as Italian citizens.
Thank you, Benny. I really appreciated how you just connected the fight for citizenship to how it impacts the everyday, especially in the current situation that we're living in this pandemic. So I thought you just gave a really clear overview, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And we've talked a lot so far about the citizenship laws and why people are fighting. But I think I'm going to turn it to Angelica so that way she can lead us into our next question. You're on mute, Angelica.
Here we are, sorry. So Camilla, you have been working extensively on this topic. And so I was wondering if you can tell us a bit more, because this is something that not everyone notices immediately, the connection that this law has with the colonial past, and especially the racial connotation embedded within.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, I think it's really important, and also thank you to Selam and Benny for sharing your experiences. And I, continue to be so inspired by, by the activism, incredible activism that you're doing in Italy on different fronts. So, I think the historical context is really important, because when I started doing research on struggles for citizenship in Italy, there was a particular narrative that I was always running up against, and it was that the concession of Italian citizenship was always very straightforward. And then in the 1990s, Italy became a country of immigration, and then it suddenly became complicated because Italians had to deal with the problem of race or diversity or plurality for the first time. But the reality is that these struggles over citizenship, over the racial boundaries of who count as Italian, have been going on since the Risorgimento, since the formation of the Italian nation state at the end of the 19th century. And these struggles were articulated in very explicitly racial or racist terms, both in relation to the North-South divide within Italy and also in relation to Italian colonialism. So, one of the things that I think makes Italy a really interesting site to think with is that the Risorgimento was happening at the end of the 19th century. And so, as Italy sort of comes together as a unified nation state out of a patchwork of, kingdoms, empires, city-states, there's this, what Northern elites are concerned with is the fact that Southern Italy is rural, it's much poorer, it's seen as sort of ridden by particularly nefarious forms of crime. And rather than kind of understanding the origins of that economic gap between the North and the South in terms of, say, internal colonialism or exploitation, it gets mapped onto racial difference. So you have people like Cesare Lombroso, who's considered the father of modern criminology, who basically collected craniometric physiognomic data to try and prove that the reason why the South was backwards in relation to the North was because Southerners were more racially proximate to Italians. And this was, you know, a really heated debate because Italy itself was also looked down upon by Northern European countries during this time, because it was seen as a site where many different races had intermingled and led to a kind of racial degradation. So for these Northern elites at the time of unification, they wanted to say, you know, no, the Northern half is Aryan, it's the South that's the problem, and the South needs to effectively be treated like an internal colony, right? It needs to be governed differently in order for this project of national unification to work. But at the same time as these debates are happening within Italy, as Italy is coming together as a nation state, it is also beginning to colonize in the Horn of Africa and in Eritrea. And so these debates about the racial boundaries of Italianness are also playing out in relation to the colonies, right? Again, raising all of these complicated questions, like if half of this country is racially proximate to African, then what constitutes the basis of Italian authority in the colonies if there actually is this kind of racial fluidity of Italians? And so at different points in Italian history, you see the kind of racial boundary line of who is Italian and therefore who is a citizen kind of shifting, right? Where first that boundary line is drawn between the North and the South, and then particularly around the time of the war in Libya, and then later the rise of fascism, there's an effort to kind of bring together Italians as one Aryan Mediterranean race that is superior to the colonized subjects in the African colonies. And even then, there are all of these sort of complicated racial divisions that are articulated through the apparatus of citizenship. So for instance, even prior to the rise of fascism, there were a number of laws that were enacted under the liberal state in Italy prior to fascism that governed whether or not the children of white Italian settlers and women from the Horn of Africa could actually be citizens or not, based on a number of different criteria like cultural attainment and also physical characteristics. During the fascist period, there's a lot that's been written about the enactment of racial laws within Italy targeting the Jews. But the reality is that racial laws, the fascist racial laws, were actually enacted in the colonies prior to their enactment within Italy. And it was not until, I believe, the 1940s or the 1950s that these restrictions on the attainment of Italian citizenship for the children of white Italian settlers and Eritrean women were finally reformed or taken off the books. That by the height of the fascist period, there had actually emerged a multi-tiered system of citizenship within the Italian Empire that distinguished between, on the basis of these racialized notions of civilizational hierarchy, white Italians, Italian settlers in Libya, Muslims in Libya, and then colonial subjects in the Horn of Africa who were subjects and not citizens. So this is all to say that these debates that we're dealing with now around jus soli, jus sanguinis, jus culturae have these deep roots in these contestations over the boundaries of Italianness, which were debates that were happening in relation to national unification, in relation to Italian colonialism, and also in relation to the mass exodus of Italians into the diaspora between the period of unification up until the end of World War II.
Wow, thank you so much, Camilla. This was so interesting. And you know, while you were talking, I was thinking that we started this series talking about the colonial period, and we are talking now about citizenship law 2020, and there is such a connection in between these two periods. You know, there is really un filo rosso, how we say in Italian, that connects all of these. But it's incredible to see how much resistance there is to acknowledge this past and to see these connections. It's really, yeah, sometimes it leaves me speechless that we're in 2020, and if we think about 1908, and you were talking about the mixed race children, we're still talking about race and blood. So yes, sorry, Candice, I leave the stage to you.
Okay, thanks, Camilla and Angelica. I was thinking about our first episode when we were talking about the silences and what's remembered, what's not remembered, and Angelica, you gave anecdotes from the folks that you interviewed of how of their experiences then coming to Italy, and it also just made me think of Selam and Benny's story. So there are a lot of connections here, and I really appreciate the overview that you provided, Camilla. So now I do want to just turn our conversation to discuss how Italiani senza cittadinanza and Abba, Vive, how these associations, these groups are trying to change the law in Italy in the current situation. So my question to Selam and Benny is if you can just tell us more about your groups, Abba, Vive and Italiani senza cittadinanza, and what changes you would like to make and the work that activists are doing in piazza and schools to help educate others. So that was definitely a mouthful, but I'll start with Selam.
I'm a member of Cantiere since several years now, and one of the things that attracted me the most and that kind of grew me up when I was a little girl living in Milan was definitely this group, Abba, Vive. It's called Committee Do Not Forget Abba. It was it started in 2008, right after his death, his assassination. Abba was a young black boy, Italian. His origins are from Burkina Faso. The family is composed by several sisters plus him, and the father and the mother. And when the city in the 14th of September of 2000 found out that a black kid was killed in the street in a very controversial way, it wasn't clear to everybody. Of course, not everybody see racism as a hatred crime as we see it. But for us, it was like, especially the oldest one in Cantiere, was immediately clear what was happening. A black kid was killed in the street, and it was clear that Italy had to face the level of racism, the level of violence, motivated by racism. Is it very important that we analyze that in that moment in Milan, nobody wanted to talk about racism when he was killed. So what we did with the family was to bring his memory, and especially we tried to follow the need of the family that was to declare that this was a racially motivated murder, and that the two killers needed to be in the trial, needed to face these two. We provide a very good lawyer, but in Italy the cases were very few. It's very difficult in Italy, even right now, to declare in front of a judge that a crime is an hate crime motivated by racism. The proof that you need to provide are very difficult to sustain for the lawyers. So in that case, even if there was a video of the murder, even if the reason why the two killers murdered the guy were very poor, because they claim that he stole a pack of biscuits. So what we try to do since then is to help the family, first of all, that lost a very young member of the family The second thing that we did, it was provide legal help to the family of Abba and to other people that were facing institutional racism. So even in the institution, it was difficult for them to claim their rights. And from that moment, what we did was to go in the schools to explain what was the history and try to connect the history of Abba to the explanation of how racism is systemic in this society. So from that moment, we started to organize, we organized different football tournaments to remember him, but also in these years, it became a festival, a 3 days festival that we held every year in the middle of Milan. And it's a collaboration between the committee and Cantiere and several other anti-racist organizations in the city. And this Scuola Abba is the school of Italian for a second language for foreign and of other languages such as Arab, French, English, that we held and that we dedicated to him, because we really believe that languages are a tool of participation. So when we, not only for people that are coming from abroad to understand Italian, and here they can also find legal advice, information about services in the cities, but also to be able to translate what we say in different languages, because Milan is a very multicultural city, and we cannot think and believe that Italian is gonna be the only language that we use to communicate. So these are the main projects that we try to build up, and that's it.
Thank you, Selam, for just sharing more about how the committee has come together and the work that the committee has done to support Abba's family as well, and just the actions that the group has taken, like with the festival, and others. So I think it's really great to learn, and as well as the language piece. Since there are so many languages spoken in Italy beyond just Italian, and I think it's just so important to really build that those connections across languages and communities. And so I'd also like to pass the question to Benny as well. If you can tell us more about Italiani Senza Cittadinanza, what changes you'd like to implement, and the work that the group is doing in piazze and schools to educate others.
Yeah, sure. So I've been part of Italiani Senza Cittadinanza for now a little bit over 3 years. Italiani Senza Cittadinanza was born in 2016 to push a change in the law that previously Selam mentioned. The law was approved actually in October 2015, was approved at the House of Deputies, but it didn't pass. So because of that, we found ourselves a year later, as you see in this picture, having an initiative Fantasmi per Legge to actually push and remind the importance to approve the law. Despite the law was a compromise, it was the chance for having a slightest improvement between the Italian citizenship law. So for this reason, we pushed at the time for the change in the citizenship law. So we wanted that law to pass, to be discussed at the Senate and be approved. So we were born for that, and we work throughout this time to push the law, and we put the law, a discussion for the law at the front. So we found ourselves in 2017 with the Cittadinanza Day, which after we campaigned for so many months, where we pushed and asked the Senate to at least discuss this law. And we found ourselves with the Cittadinanza Day, which was a day of celebration. It was also a reminder for the fact that it's been 2 years that this law was stuck at the House of Deputies and was not being discussed at the Senate. It was a celebration of what it means to be Italians of different origins, and it was a very beautiful moment between our movement, because we also saw like the children that are part of the Italian schools, mainly schools in Rome, like the Di Donato, Pisacane, schools that they have students of foreign origins. And so we wanted to celebrate that, and we wanted that to show that these are the Italians of tomorrow. Maybe it sounds a little bit lame, but yeah, to a certain extent, yes, they are the Italians of tomorrow. So for this reason, we had these initiatives in 2017. And so while we were pushing for the change of the law and the approval of the law, unfortunately, the law did not pass. There was no discussion in the Senate. There was an attempt of discussion actually in the Senate in June 2017, but actually that was welcomed with punches and hatred towards the law, and actually the protest by Casa Pound outside of the Senate. So with that to say that the law did not pass, and with the act of actually, it was a lack of courage by the Senate to actually not even discuss the law. And so for this reason, we took a moment of reflection after 2017, and we realized that there was still a lot of work to be done culturally. So this is why we decided to work on the short movie Io sono Rosa Parks, because that was an opportunity for us to tell our story through the media. We know that oftentimes the media is a great tool, and so we did that, and it's a moment for us of big pride, because we had the opportunity to tell our stories by connecting. Yesterday was the day where Rosa Parks sat 65 years ago on that bus to say that I'm not getting up. So in this movie, we say we're not getting up, we're not leaving our country. And we have a representation of Italians of different origins ready to fight for change and telling our stories and say that we belong between our society. So that was very important. We brought that movie in schools, theaters, in different trainings, and that was an opportunity to have the country to reflect and have classes, students to reflect of what Italians look like today and why it's important to have a current citizenship law. And so there have been instances, for example, when I was in Sardinia, where students were like, I'm also Rosa Parks, so they were ready to fight alongside the Italians without citizenship. And yes, it's a very great tool for which people have used. And so in 2016, 2017, we were mainly in the piazza, but now like we're more like thinking about the cultural work, and also currently we're also working as well to ensure that there is like, we actually wanted the abrogation of the Salvini decrees that didn't occur, and unfortunately, currently there is, if you obtain Italian citizenship and you are foreign origin, that citizenship can be revoked. So we're currently working to ensure that people have access to welfare, especially with the current COVID situation, and to ensure that also professionals, like medical professionals, have access as well to employment too. So we're pushing for different changes between the laws and decrees.
Thank you, Benny and Selam. The work that you both are doing is so important. And I saw, for example, in the image of the film, Io sono Rosa Parks, that it was in collaboration with different organizations as well, which I think is really important, because there are, while we have just you two here representing different groups, there are others in Italy as well that are doing this work. And so I think that's so important that there is that type of collaboration, and also the work across the country, right? So Abba Vive is in Milan, Italiani senza cittadinanza. I know, Benny, you're based in Rome, but from the stories that you're telling, it's not just occurring in those cities. And so I think that's so important because not all of Italy is just those two cities. And so next, I would also just like to ask you, Camilla, if you could share more about your book project. It's currently titled Citizenship and Diasporic Ethics, Youth Politics in the Black Mediterranean. And you analyze the fight that young Black Italians have been doing. And what are your observations? What type of data have you gathered? We already have had the opportunity to listen to just great testimonies by Selam and Benny.
Yeah, thank you. So the title is constantly in flux. I'm not exactly sure what it is right now, but I'm hoping that the book will be out, if not at the end of 2021, then the beginning of 2022. And so, you know, the book sort of traces a sort of a narrative arc in the growth of a Black Italian politics in Italy. You know, one of the things that I was really struck by as someone who, you know, is half Italian, and my father is African American, who's been going back and forth to Italy since I was a small child, was you know, really in the 2010s, all of a sudden, you know, meeting people and, you know, coming across websites and YouTube channels and Facebook pages that were explicitly about a Black Italian or Afro-Italian identity, which is not something that I had seen before. And so much of the conversation about Blackness in Italy was really focused on African immigrants in Italy, but not so much on the fact that, you know, now when we talk about a Black presence in Italy, it's, you know, second, third, and in some communities like the Eritrean community, fourth generation, right, of Black people who have been in Italy. And so I became really interested in the ways that, you know, Black Italians were mobilizing around this collective identity. And when I started my work, you know, citizenship was really one of the primary spaces in which that was happening. So, you know, I spent a lot of time going to meetings and protests. You know, my methodology as a researcher is mostly ethnographic participant observation, right? So like deep hanging out and just really kind of understanding how movements grow and evolve and having long conversations. And I did a bit of archival research as well, but really the focus was on this sort of deep ethnographic engagement that I carried out between 2012 and 2019. And so, you know, like I said, I was really interested in the ways that activists like, you know, the Rete G2 and Italiani senza cittadinanza understood mobilization for citizenship reform as an inherently anti-racist project, right? That this wasn't just about, you know, recognition as citizens, although that is really important, but that also part of the movement was really this work of challenging the normative ideas that people have of Italianness and showing in really powerful ways the way that the current formulation of citizenship law is inherently racist. And one of the things that I became really interested in was also how the citizenship reform struggle articulated with other kinds of Black struggles in Italy and also Black struggles kind of in a broader global scale. So, you know, what does it mean that the kind of one of the sort of heights of the citizenship reform movement in, you know, the period of 2015 to 2017 up until the defeat of the bill was happening alongside the unfolding of the refugee crisis in Italy as well. And what were the ways in which people were able to draw connections between those struggles as all tied to kind of the anti-Blackness of the Italian racial state, and in what ways was the kind of framing, the liberal framing of the state, trying to break up those potential solidarities, right, between Italian citizens and waiting and newly arrived refugees. And so I kind of, in my book, trace the way these conversations unfolded, where I'm looking at everything from, you know, mobilizations explicitly around citizenship, the work of young Black entrepreneurs who are trying to make interventions in the space of kind of, you know, economic and cultural production, as well as, like I said, these sort of more capacious efforts at forging Black solidarities between Black Italians who were born and raised in Italy and newly arrived refugees, and also the ways that this growing Black Italian movement has now articulated in really fascinating ways with the kind of global Black Lives Matter movement.
Thanks, Camilla. While you were speaking, I was thinking about what Benny shared earlier about how the movement for citizenship is a Black Lives Matters movement in Italy, and I believe you've also mentioned this in a in a separate event. But in Italy, all of these isms are layered on top of each other, and so compared to, let's say, in the US. And so it's really, I really appreciate hearing you share how in your book, it's really like just unpacking that. And I've sensed that there are all of these isms on top of each other in Selam and Benny's stories, where you can't just easily tease it out and say this is a race issue or this is a gender issue, or focusing, compartmentalizing it based on discipline. And so thank you for that. And now I'm going to turn it to Angelica.
Thank you so much for all of this very interesting conversation. Candice, you just mentioned Black Lives Matter, and well, we know that Black lives do not always matter in this country. So we've noticed how people racialized as non-white in Italy are victims of racially motivated attacks, although it's very difficult because of a lack of laws to punish this crime precisely because they are racist. They're not just violent crimes, but also racist crimes. So this is another issue. We have a lack of laws targeted racism. But, you know, we mentioned the name Abba a few times. And so I would like to go back to you, Selam, and talk about Abba. Abba was, as we mentioned earlier, a 19-year-old Black Italian man who was brutally murdered in 2008 in Milan. And this is one of the stories, this was one of those kind of murders that shifted a bit the discourse, had an impact, that made history in a way. And so I would like to know, because you were there, you were in Milan, what is your engagement with this story? What do you remember of the time? And how this committee per non dimenticare Abba was created? And above all, what about the role of the institutions in this story, in this case?
Well, thank you, Angelica. When Abba was killed, it was 19 and I was 17. I was 17. I was going to school, to high school. I was actively participating in the youngest high school students movement that were running through the city for the school reform. And when this happened, I think that we thought that as a Black person, I thought that nobody really would have understood what happened. Like, I had the impression that it's gonna be our victim. It's not gonna be everybody. It's not gonna be in the memory of everybody. He was friend of friends. We were like actually going out in the same places. We were both very attached to the Black culture. So in Milan, we have, different spots in which the youngest, especially attached to this kind of culture or to the rap underground music. And that's how, for example, people from Cantiere, older than me, knew him because he was going to the rap battle that were held over there. And I guess that at that moment, the pressure that the youngest did, exactly as now in the Black Lives Matter movement, is a young generation that is pushing for another kind of view of the story. Because the oldest people, they were all about, he was a robber. And everybody were not understanding the fact that if you see a Black person and you see somebody that is a stealer, is a robber, that's your problem, because that boy did nothing. And I immediately understood that that what the two white men that killed him saw in him was a young black person, probably answering to them because he's Italian and is not, understanding why people is acting as they can overreact to you, or they can be, rude. And that's a confrontation that we all had in our histories, because I had several situations in which, I'm seen more than others. If I'm in a shop, or if I'm taking, the bus and the checker wants to see my ticket before others. I mean, those kind of microaggressions are often taking place in our cities, but we as born here are not able to accept it. And the level of violence actually escalated from that moment on, because the Senegal, for example, community lost a lot of people due to this kind of violence. And every time the reason of the murder was different. He was a crazy man. He was stressed. Exactly as when we see gender violence, there is always a justification for the person that commit the violence, but never a fully understand of what are the what is the cultural environment in which those murders take place. That's the problem. And that's why for us, during the past festival in September, we had to remember, we created a moment with a Capo Verdean community in Milan to remember Willy Monteiro Duarte, which is another boy that was killed in a very not similar situation. But again, the people didn't want to talk about racism, as if you don't say that word, you're gonna fight it in a different way. Now we need a different strategy. Also from anti-racist activists, there was the reason of not creating fear around the community. But the community that surround this kind of murder doesn't have to be afraid of being called racist. They have to be afraid of being the place of such murder. So for us, in that moment, we decided then to create a committee with the family, because we met in the place he was killed. That's when we met. We met several days after, because we tried to connect to them. And then we started a campaign with the friends and family. And the last, for example, we did a demonstration for Black Lives Matter, but it was clear to the activists in Milan that this was just a unified answer to systemic racism, which is happening all over the world. And if in Europe the answer to this demonstration was so strong, is because we have problems in racial violence, police violence. We have this kind of problem. And the African American activists and movement around Black Lives Matter actually gave us the possibility to connect with those words. Policing is something that we face too. And right now, we just passed a refugees crisis that was so called, but it actually stayed for more than 10 years because the European Union is controlling a lot more the borders. And for example, these actually increased the level of violence on the streets, because the propaganda actually made an impact. So for example, we had Bangla Tour. That was the idea, especially in other cities, but also in Milan, of young people, mostly white, but not only, young people going to kick and to brutalize people from Bangladesh, calling it Bangla Tour, which is something that very offensive to a community that is mostly relegated to illegal jobs. So what we need to understand is that what we try to make more to make understand to the population of Milan, but not only, is that the level of institutional racism allow a racial propaganda that allow this action on the streets. And especially the narrative that has been held after the death of these kids was actually telling us that we can die for stupid reason. I don't know the word in English, but in Italian, in a juridical talk, we can say futili motivi. Futili, it's not stupid because it's a different word, but we can say that we are tired. And when Black Lives Matter came, we had to reconnect with the story of violence that also in Italy has been held. It's not so often and so dramatic to the people that are born in Italy, even if the aggression are often happening, but not as killed. But for the people that are illegally here or immigrants, the level is different. It's higher. The violence is higher.
Thank you, Selam, for just sharing about these layers of institutional racism and violence, specifically anti-Blackness. I heard in the echoes of the work that you're doing, there's also these echoes of anti-racism, which we spoke about earlier. And so I really just appreciate the overview that you've given us. And I do also, throughout this whole conversation, speaking about citizenship, it made me wonder about who, about when you have citizenship, that means maybe there's someone who isn't going to be considered a citizen, right? And that's really what we're getting at. And I'm wondering if you can just connect the struggle that we see today to the so-called refugee crisis. That's how it's typically portrayed in the media. And I want to know what types of connections or paradoxes do you see between the current citizenship law and even immigration laws such as Bossi-Fini. And this is a question for everyone. I'll pass it to Camilla. And one last thing, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will answer them.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think that there are so many levels at which these struggles are connected. And, as you mentioned, Candice, the kind of superimposition of, racism is tied to border fortification, which is tied to kind of colonial and post-colonial legacies, right? So, again, I think that whereas in the context of the United States, there is a kind of siloing that happens where struggles against racism get mapped onto Black communities. Struggles against restrictive citizenship and immigration laws get mapped onto Latinx communities, and struggles against colonialism get mapped onto Native communities. And again, even in the United States, we know that these struggles are not separate, but there is a kind of shorthand that's sometimes used. In Italy, all of these phenomena sort of collapse onto each other, onto the same communities and onto the same families. And so, one of the things that I learned, for instance, from talking to Eritreans in Milan who were doing mutual aid work with newly arrived refugees was the importance of, in our politics, moving beyond the state-imposed category of, citizen versus refugee versus undocumented immigrant, and really thinking about the spaces where these struggles interconnect, whether it's around structural anti-Blackness, whether it's around the kind of legacies of colonialism and their reverberations in the present. And, even in the kind of logics or ideologies that undergird Italian citizenship law and that undergird immigration law, there are similar ideas, right, around the maintenance of whiteness, and also around a kind of racialization of economic productivity, right? So, with the Bossi-Fini, but also with the, as early as the Legge Martelli, there was this, basically instituting this idea that immigration is a problem unless it can be shown to have some kind of economic value. And those are similar kinds of, that's a similar discourse that's used as well in the context of citizenship reform struggles, right? Why should we devote our scarce resources or jobs to, you know, these kids who are not really Italian, which then puts activists in the position of having to kind of prove that they are making economic contributions to the country, right? Again, having to kind of talk back to the state in that way. So, you know, I think that there are these similar dynamics of racial capitalism that actually bring these struggles together in really powerful ways, and in ways that I think activists in the United States can also learn from.
Thank you very much, Camilla. Benny or Selam, anything you would like to add about the connection with the Mediterranean and citizenship and identity?
Yeah, I don't think I would say as beautiful as Camilla said it. I think she said it perfectly. Like, she said it perfectly. But like, yeah, so I just wanted to add a little bit to something. Like, for us, for the movement, for us, our push has always been, although we see like these two issues as distinguished, we very often show up for refugees, like when it came to protests, initiatives, and support for refugees, because we believe it's important, like if we say we're citizens of this country, to welcome, as a country, to be welcoming. And so we want like people to feel welcome in this country. We want refugees to feel welcome in this country. And unfortunately, what we see, when we've seen a change in law, the Decreti Sicurezza, known as the Salvini decrees, they touch both refugee rights, asylum seeker rights, and also citizenship rights. So oftentimes everything gets looping together. I think it's important to see like how different the struggle are, sometimes to see like what different needs like this population have. Because especially like when I think of refugees, I think unfortunately they don't know the language as well. So sometimes they need that extra support, that support for integration and then inclusion as well. Because sometimes the situation can be so like, I don't know, the term is coming to me like in Italian, precari, like can be so like unstable. So it's important to ensure their safety and their basic needs, but also to ensure that they can fully realize themselves. And when it comes to the Italians with their citizenship, maybe we have the language knowledge, but there are other things that we need to integrate. So sometimes is at the same time that we meet each other, because we have even people between the movement that want to support refugees, let it be in Italy, let it be at the offices of the Questura, the immigration office, or let it be in Greece. So it's important. And unfortunately, the contradiction is that oftentimes, as we are Italians without citizenship, we are foreigners by law. So whereas foreigners with a permit to stay, Italians without citizenship with a permit to stay in the countries of our birth and where we grew up, sometimes that can cause us to be deported. So sometimes we feel we can relate to that sense of instability, or that risk of being like, of not belonging and being like sent back maybe to a country that you haven't really visited in a long time, to a country of origin. Because in the moment, like a permit to stay is not granted because you're not here to work. Like something that Camilla specified about the working, like as Italians without citizenship, we didn't choose to come here. It wasn't our choice to come here or be born here. We didn't choose to come here to work. So I think it's the aspect that is important for this, in the moment we're talking about the law, to be recognized, that we're not here to work. And so that's an important aspect to take into consideration, the fact that we are here, we grew up in this country. It's not for us to, not just to be a resource in this country, but just we belong as citizens, and we don't want to risk deportation. Like, for example, in the case of the Daca and the Dreamers generation, we kind of share the same fear. And as well for the refugees as well, we share that fear of like being taken away or be brought back on a safe space, or be brought back or be like taken away from our homes.
Sure, thank you, Benedicta. Selam, do you have a last comment about this?
Yes, I would have much comments, but I'm going to try to be short.
Thank you.
Especially, I think that what is happening in Italy with racism is that is often very simplified. That kind of simplification made for us difficult because we have to do the double of the work. We need to educate people and then tell them our reason. So we need to figure out a way to communicate and to educate people to their own history, their own state law, and then again to explain how that's racism. I think that it was very important what Camilla said about colonialism, and the fact is that, for example, I think that in Italy also the movement had been very focused on the transition from the fascism state to the Republican era, and also not to allow any fascism propaganda, except for nowadays, which we had a long time, so we need to repeat things more often. But that transition was never even imagined about the fact that we had colonies. We experienced, as country, we experienced colonialism. So that part of racism was never even cared. They never cared about how to dismantle the colonialism era. And in nowadays, we can see it in different things. For example, the Black bodies are exploited, as seen as immigrants often, all the time, even if we are Italians or we are Black before being Italian, you know. And the citizenship, there was a moment in which they tried to divide our families, because they were saying to us, you can be a citizen, but the children of the refugees might need to wait. The people that are poor might need to wait. So there was a level of attack about our identity. We are children of immigrants, not migrants, immigrants. They are going to stay here in this country no matter what. So the idea that you want to, you know, that was very tricky for us. And I think that the resistance of the Italians is often very poor, because it's like they are claiming we are not that bad. And this is the problem. Racism is not about a personal opinion. It's not like you think you're not bad, you think you're not racist. The architecture, the structure of the country is based on this. And I think that also the fact that Casa Pound was very against the word meticciato, it's clearly that there is a colonial history in this country that is still alive about racism. And the level of the problem, the big problem, I think, with the Mediterranean issue is that we have too many fights on our bodies. We have too many level of discrimination on our bodies. But I think that, for example, we decided as a committee, not to forget Abba, we decided to make a campaign 2 years ago. After the festival, we did a campaign dedicated to Mediterranean Saving Humans, which is an NGO or the society, the Italian society that rise up against what's happening on the border. We collected the money and we decided to dedicate 2 small equipment that are very important for the main boat to save, to do the rescue. We dedicated them to Abba. And that was something that, for example, the people in Milan kind of understood. They understood the idea that we cannot divide our histories, also when they are very problematic in explaining what racism is.
Sure.
And that's it. I mean, what I just want to add is that the most of the murder motivated by racial violence are actually happening on work field. So when there is like an illegal job, or even when I cannot ask and claim my rights or job. So there is a big connection also on this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Selam, for making this connection so explicit, and how the material condition, the economic condition, is so intertwined with racism. Actually, one couldn't exist without the other. So I think we are at the end of our conversation. I can see from the comments, people are following us from Rome, LA, France. So thank you very much for your support and for your enthusiasm. So we need to make some ringraziamenti, I would say. So we want to thank, first of all, you guys. You were fantastic speakers tonight. Selam Tesfai, Benedicta Djumpah, Camilla Hawthorne. Thank you so much for these very thoughtful conversations that we could have carried on for hours, like every time. I say the same thing every time because there is so much to say. And then we wanted to thank, ovviamente, Casa Italiana, Stefano, Julie, and Jesse for being amazing and helping us so much and to support this idea and became all of this. It's unbelievable. And NYU Florence, who is also supporting us. And I wanted to thank Candice for being a fantastic co-host and looking after all the details where I get very often lost within. So thank you so much, Candice.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Angelica. Thank you, Casa Italiana, for this this just platform, this amazing opportunity to bring forth this, I recall the first series, online series dedicated to discourses on Blackness and Italy. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.